Just a couple of matters I'd just like to deal with first. The A3 drawings, has that been produced yet?
We're going to try and do it today, so if not, first thing tomorrow morning, if that's all right.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if the council know that they mentioned earlier on about potential committees tomorrow, or not committee, but weren't sure if we could stay in the room. Yes. Yes. I think we agreed Thursday we had to leave by 5, but and you were double checking on tomorrow in case another meeting had been put in the diary. Yeah. That's 4, is it? Okay. Okay, I'll just leave that with the council. And then on terms of affordable housing need, I'm happy to rely on the written evidence. I was just checking back through my notes over lunch, if both parties are as well.
We would prefer, if possible, for there to be a short, so like half an hour or 40 minutes or whatever, roundtable session, even though most of the topics are agreed. And the reason is that albeit that we totally accept that the vast majority of the numbers can almost be moved through, well, you can read them for yourself now. We do want, I mean, obviously it's something, I mean, it's still in the end, it's a greenbelt case. We're on the council's analysis of the position. It's on the appellant to demonstrate very special circumstances, etc., etc. And you know, affordable housing is right at the top of the tree for us in terms of those benefits on which we purport to, you know, rely. And so it couldn't really be more critical to our case, accepting of course that most of the figures are agreed. We'd appreciate the opportunity, say for 30 minutes or something like that, 40 minutes, whatever it is, for Mr. Stacey to summarise to you what the really mission critical bits are of his evidence, so that you've absolutely got them. But we totally accept that anything beyond that would be completely disproportionate given where we're at in terms of agreed positions, if you like, between us and the council. But obviously in the end, so that's our position. It's totally a question for you. Okay,
I'm happy to be a short roundtable session if that's of help, and obviously the council can will be a part of that as much as you wish to be.
Certainly. I mean, it seems to me if it's a question of weight to be given to the provision of affordable housing, that's a question for planning witnesses primarily. I hear what's said, and I won't stand in the way of a round table, but I wonder if it's necessary, really.
Okay. I say, as long as it's focused and short, then I can't see any harm, I suppose, in having that session.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On that basis, I'm happy to turn over to you, Mr. Atkinson, for your first witness.
Thanks, sir. I call that Emily Bevan. Now we've heard from you already this morning, but just by way of formal introduction, you are Emily Bevan. You are the Principal Urban Design Officer at the council. You are an architect by qualification and training. In fact, you have a degree, master's and postgraduate diploma in architecture. All right, thank you very much. And in light of the remarks just before we broke, just to be clear, the evidence which you gave this morning at the round table, it's right to say that addressed, if you like, the freestanding design element in the reason for refusal, by which I mean I read the phrase out from the reason itself, that the words "and would fail to provide a high quality, beautiful place, nor add to the quality of the area." Is that correct? Now, in this format, the more formal evidence in chief cross-examination format, we focus on two different aspects, specifically the character and appearance of the area and how design bears on the openness of the greenbelt. Okay, understood. Good. Well, thank you very much. In that case, if I could ask you just to read a few short passages from your proof, dealing first with character and appearance. And if you could read, please, at page 31, your paragraph 6.5.8 through to 6.5.10.
The Basildon Borough Greenbelt Topic Paper 2018 has been withdrawn and has no status as planning policy. But it also identified the Maitland Lodge site, referred to as new site 3, within area 25. The site is presented as potentially appropriate for development, but on the recommendation that existing landscape features are retained and enhanced, and that the design is complementary to the site's character in order to ensure any harm arising is minimized. 6.5.9. The discussion here concerns whether the scheme as submitted is suitable or if it harms the character and appearance of the area and countryside. The essential point that connects all of the documents above is that this is a sensitive area and it needs an appropriately balanced development. This is where a judgment needs to be made. It is my belief that the drive to provide a higher number of housing units than was recommended, for instance, in the emerging local plan as site H21B, creates a scheme that is out of balance with the context and is not sensitive enough to its locality, therefore inflicting harm. 6.5.10. The relatively concealed nature of the site is the main characteristic, in my opinion, which led to its identification as potential for development. However, this works both ways. It may be limited in what it visually detracts from its sensitive context, but the scheme, as proposed, is also limited in what it adds. As mentioned in 6.5.3, a well-designed scheme can add value to an area, but the proposal does not offer the generosity of open space, buffer planting, character, and beauty to do so here. Its key attribute is that it is inward-facing and mostly screened. And where it does present itself to the street, it does so in an awkward manner. This is not enough to satisfy the contextually driven, high-quality characteristics of development required by policy.
Okay, thank you. So, for me, a number of supplementary questions on the character and appearance question, and you begin your proof, that section, in fact, from which you've just read, but with reference to the landscape character area 12, the Burstead sloping farmland within which the site sits. Mr. Crawford, for the appellants, does the same, but he makes 3 points which, in his judgment, distinguish the appeal site from being characteristic of the wider LCA 12 area. I just wanted to ask you about those 3 areas of distinction which Mr. Crawford makes. Seem to be central issue between you. And the first thing Mr. Crawford refers to is the urbanizing influence of the existing housing to the north of the site. It's Mill Road, is it the name of the street, as well as the South End Road itself, the A129. He says, well, yes, but these urbanizing influences mean it changes its characteristics. What do you say to that?
I think, urbanizing is perhaps not the right word. And I'll explain why. I think I agree that the character of the context is, in part made up by the houses that are around the built environment on South End Mill Road. These are visible, but I disagree on the sort of extent of the claim of the urbanizing effect. As mentioned earlier this morning, the site has a sort of condition that's very typical of an edge assessment. It's a really familiar setup that we know well. It's about this kind of trailing out, this fizzling out of a town or a village. So the properties on South End Road line just one side of the street and then open to fields on the front and the back. And this condition works because it is a fizzling out of the town. It's the if you like, the denser urban area in Billericay is slowly kind of melting away until it finally becomes countryside, fields, farmland.
So you accept there's some urbanizing influence,
There
but
is.
less, you say,
It's
than
built environment. There are houses there. And I think it's good to sort of recognise the character of these houses. It's not, we're talking about apartment blocks and terraces even. It's sort of semi-detached, detached homes, quite a lot of bungalows, especially the area on Mill Road, directly adjacent to the site, bungalows. So I think maybe this is where this sort of conflict between the use of the word urban is maybe not suitable, in my opinion.
Is there a word maybe which you would prefer to urbanizing influence?
I think it should definitely at least be suburban. Sort of suburb, these typologies are suburban typologies. We could either say there's a suburban influencing, or we could just say this site has a sort of suburban rural character. There's a mix here. It's on that edge between the town as it fizzles out and becomes the countryside.
Thank you. Okay. The second main point which Mr. Crawford makes is he says, well, the appeal site is well contained visually, particularly by the boundary to the western side and the boundary to the south, which contains the site and limits into visibility between it and the wider landscape area 12 parcel. What's your reaction to that?
So again, we touched on this briefly this morning, and I definitely agree that the western boundary is quite well screened and it's got quite dense planting, but it's the south that gives us quite a lot of concern. So I can't remember the exact wording that he used, but it gives a high degree of containment, I think. I would say it's a moderate degree of containment. it's actually quite visible from the south.
And what about the proposed planting? How would that bear on the southern boundary?
So I believe it's one of the very special circumstances. It's claimed that there's going to be enhanced buffer planting. In reality, perhaps I can turn you to, in my appendix, the landscaping scheme. I'll just write you a page. So it's appendix C.
Yeah. Appendix C or proof, yeah?
Yeah, sorry, in my proof, there's some A3 drawings at the back.
Okay. Do you have a page number? Maybe that would be.
Page 42.
Yeah.
Right one, but this is the kind of area view. So you can see here the sort of western boundary that's got quite dense planting. And you can see here actually it's quite limited on the south. There are some trees right in the corner here, but it's not very dense. And then if you turn to page 44. So this is the soft landscaping plan showing the southern boundary. And the green is sort of existing, so again you can see that in comparison to the west, it's actually very light from the south. And the area of enhanced buffer planting is just this corner here, this sort of southeast corner. Some hedges that's proposed.
Okay.
I'll take you through the other drawings, but if you looked at the other soft landscaping plans, you'd see that actually that's the only bit of additional enhanced buffer planting on the boundary that I can see.
There are more trees proposed, aren't there? Is that?
Yes, that's a good point. So in the July 2022 updates following my April comments, there was 4 trees added to the gardens on the south. So that's page 37, the updated site plan. There's 4 trees here.
Sorry, I can't see. If you just hold that there.
Yeah,
We're
sure.
pointing around the.
So page 37 on the southern boundary,
Mm-hmm.
there's 4 trees added.
Is that at the bottom of plots
So plot 15,
12 to
14, yeah, 12 to 15. I think it's worth noting that sometimes I get the proofs mixed up because I reviewed them obviously both, but I think it's in Charles's brief that says that the security of the it was Collins, the security of trees in private gardens can't be secured. So I'm a little bit unclear if those will actually be provided or not, those 4 trees.
okay.
And also just to add to that there are some trees and hedges to be removed from the boundaries. Don't have that plan to hand, but from memory I think it's on the north and a little bit to the west.
All right, thank you. And the third main point, which Mr. Crawford touches upon, is the urbanising influence further of the existing development on the site itself. You described them this morning, stables and so on. Some of the buildings for which used for equestrian, which is said to be more urban than rural by Mr. Crawford. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, in all honesty, this one baffles me a little bit. I don't see how you can sort of take stables, outbuildings, sheds, and call them urban. It's very much more to me farm-like. As I mentioned this morning, they're low in height, temporary in nature. Quite a variety of construction types, but definitely not urban.
Overall, then, what do you say? What level of impact do you say the proposals have on the character and appearance of the area?
The level of impact on the character and appearance of the area. I mean, the site is quite screened. We've sort of established that this morning, especially to the west. There are the screens to the north and the east due to other buildings that there are views through, but it's actually reasonably open to the south, and the enhanced buffer planting that's being sort of proposed isn't there. So, what did I say? I said moderate degree of containment, so that is playing a part. In terms of what the site is doing, for the context for the area. Again, this morning I spoke about the kind of contextual reference. I won't repeat that this morning, but I think the conclusion for me really is that it doesn't have a positive impact. The scheme doesn't really seem to be adding much to the area. Again, it's sort of taken this kind of concealed background development, quite inward facing, quite disconnected, sort of looping cul-de-sac. It's not offering benefits in terms of functionality, but also in terms of character and beauty. So I'm quite clear it's not a positive impact. It's not contributing to enhancing the natural and open environment as NPPF 174. It's also not neutral, as we spoke about this morning, where it does show its face to the context, such as on South End Road. It's kind of awkward. It's not quite working right. The gatehouses, even though they are trying to do what they're trying to do, they're not working, in my opinion, well on the street scene. And the junction isn't creating a particularly pleasant place. And then also the roof lines, which we spoke about this morning, but more importantly, probably when we're talking about this kind of impact on the context and the character and the landscape, openness, it's about those roof lines, because those are the things that you see. More of the carports, more of the ways that they're interrupting the wide gables don't read when you're outside, because that's all quite low level. It's just about that consistency of roof line, the spacing between buildings, and sort of quite a lot of maybe mass at the roof level with dormers. Those are the things that kind of create quite an urban, formal, massive, but sort of there's a volume there. It's not a sort of small scale Arcadian rural scene. So in conclusion, to answer your question, it's not positive, it's not neutral, which means it's negative, but it is quite screened. So I would say moderate adverse impact.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'd like to move then second aspect of your evidence, which is how, or indeed if, the design can have a bearing on the openness of the land. Now, again, just by way of context, Mr. Crawford essentially says, well, it can't. Detailed aspects of design don't really bear on the openness. It's all to do with the quantum and the other aspects. You can't have a bearing on that. Do you agree with that analysis of the impact of design on openness?
Yeah, so I would disagree with that. I think that it's much more complicated than that. Obviously, there is a sort of high level, the amount of volume, the amount of footprint has an impact on openness. That's our kind of basic start point. But there's sort of a multifaceted aspect to openness. It's about, is it an actual openness, like physical, or is it a perception of openness? And this is reflected in the MPPG. I'm not going to read out the whole reference ID, but the one about assessing the impact of a proposal on openness, which talks about openness having a spatial and visual aspects.
Yeah.
So
but just
yeah.
particularly the aspects of design, how they, in your
Yeah.
judgment,
So
can
what
bear
I'm
on
saying
that?
is that, you know, the kind of actual in terms of volume is a lot easier to understand. But in terms of the design and the sort of perception, that's where we start to bring in design and how the scheme is carried out. So, for example, layout. So the scheme is quite gridded layout. In my opinion, it's quite cramped. That creates much more of a feeling of a kind of closed environment because you see a lot of buildings at once. The vistas aren't necessarily well resolved. The buildings are kind of linked by those carports. All of that sort of creates quite a continuous frontage. Also, open space. Obviously, open space is non-developed land. If that were to be in the middle of the site, I think it would be a lot more effective in, might not necessarily be bigger, but it would make the space feel more open. There's also part of that, it's about landscaping. It's about, again, I mentioned this morning about soft landscaping as opposed to hard. Soft landscaping can really help to even just block a view of a not very nice building, or to block views of cars, or all the paraphernalia that happens around residential developments, and create that feeling of not necessarily a sort of openness of view. It can be sort of framed, but an openness of feeling like you can breathe. So as well as landscaping, there's also sort of the massing, the height, the way that the volume is distributed across the site, the way that enclosure is created within the street. And also, again, to refer back to my point about the roof lines in this scheme, I think they will be quite dominant. Not particularly more than any other scheme necessarily, but just because they're quite low buildings, and you will read the roofs. So within the site, the massings and the way that the roofs are designed will have an impact. But sort of to come back outside the site, that roof line is one of the most sort of readable design features, if you like.
All right. Thank you. And finally, Chief, you mentioned in your evidence, the first paragraph, you read from a moment ago, you refer there at your 6.5.8, you refer to the 2018 Greenbelt topic paper, which you note that the design must be complementary to the site character. It may be you've already answered this question, in which case don't need to repeat yourself, but how would you say the scheme could have been designed so it would have been complementary to the site character in order to minimise any harm arising?
Yeah, so I think this is hopefully covered this morning. The main aspects being that, in my opinion, this isn't really an urban context. It's quite a rural, green, open, it's a part of the green belt. So I think the scheme could have celebrated open space, non-developed land, landscaping. Those ones. I want to keep it to the question, which is about the impact on the context. So I think, yeah. Is that a full enough question without repeating myself?
Yes. Okay. All right. Is there anything you'd like to add? Don't really have to, just because I'm asking you.
I think maybe just to sort of add on again that, you know, in terms of the character of the site, it's about this fizzling out, and I think there's a bit of a disagreement or tension in some of the documents that we're going to be referring to over this week about the appropriateness of this site for development and how much. We're not really talking about density, but it is part of the conversation. So to me, quite a key part of this is that there is a parcel of land that has been suggested for development, which is why we're all here today discussing something on this site. And it's about how that's been done, and it's about what's appropriate to this location on this kind of the edge of Great Thurston as it kind of fizzles out and melts into countryside. Is a big mass of housing suitable, or is there a different approach here that would be more appropriate?
Thank you very much, Ms. Bevan. If you wait there, there'll be some questions from my own friend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, do you not have one?
I've got one.
Have you got a spare?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise.
Oh, you've not got one. You've not got one. I'm sorry.
Sorry, aren't you realised?
Luckily, no one's watching at the moment, so we're okay.
Yes, but obviously, yes, like we need to leave one there. So I didn't realise.
Absolutely. No, nor did I.
I find it slightly odd that these microphones, and I see them in lots of rooms, but red means it's working.
Yeah, red means actually, so when you talk,
Yeah.
you can turn it on when you talk, and when you don't talk, you turn it off. And it will create a bit more noise for the person that's talking.
Okay, maybe that's what it
Normally when
means.
it's the camera seeing the one that's talking, but I think you just
Okay. So I'm slightly self-conscious. I'm holding my pen in a slightly odd way. It's because I burnt my hand when I was ironing my shirts yesterday evening.
Oh God.
So I'm sort of holding it a bit like my 4-year-old son holds a pen. Yeah. So if you notice that, just that's why. Anyway,
Are you? Yep, great. That's marvellous. Are you happy, sir, for me to press on?
yes.
Lovely. I'll just get good afternoon. Okay, so I'll ask you about those same two topics, trying where I can not to sort of trespass on things that you've already been over this morning in the design roundtable. Try and keep it to character and appearance as distinct from detailed design. And then secondly, greenbelt openness. Although I appreciate you say some things about greenbelt openness, and also Ms. Cook for the council also says some other things about greenbelt openness. So it may be I've got a few questions for you, a few questions for her. I'll try and stick as much as I can to things you talk about, you know, when I'm formulating questions to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
So character and appearance, though, it is, if you like, just you, not Ms. Cook. You're the council's witness when it comes to this topic of character and appearance, as I understand it.
Yep.
And you deal with this topic of character and appearance, then the first one of our two topics, in your proof of evidence, and you deal with it at pages 30 to 31, section 6.5. Now, in Mr. Crawford's proof, he goes through, and it's just the inspector's notes, page 42, don't need to turn it up, but we obviously can do if we need to. He goes through the way that landscape professionals undertake this kind of assessment, if you'd like to, but by all means do please turn it up. So don't put your proof away. But if you turn up Mr. Crawford's proof, I'm at page 42. And I'm sure you've obviously read through all of this, so it'll all be familiar stuff to you. He tells us on page 42, it's his section 8, all about Glivia, the industry standard text commonly referred to as Glivia 3, and he's put some extracts in an appendix to his proof of evidence. Yeah. You see where I'm at? Page 42. And this is, you'll be aware, a sort of industry standard document, Glivia, produced by the Landscape Institute, which explains how sort of LVIA style assessments are to be done. Yeah.
Yep.
It's not an approach, it's not a criticism, but we're trying to start at the very beginning. It's not an approach that you yourself have gone through.
No, I haven't pretended that I'm doing an LVA.
No, or anything similar. So you've not gone through the sort of the structured approach of considering, for example, landscape sensitivity as a component of susceptibility to change and the value of the landscape receptor, that kind of thing. You've not done that sort of exercise, whether it's a proper LVIA or not. You've done your own thing, if you like.
I've done my own judgment.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you do then? What you do back in your proof of evidence on page 30 and 31? You review over the course of these 2 pages a series of documents, landscape character assessment documents, first from 2014, and then you touch on the Greenbelt Review as well, all on page 30. And you go over on page 31 to talk about at the top, the 2017 landscape appraisals of potential strategic development sites, and you go on to sort of talk about what some of those documents said, Greenbelt topic paper. So what you're doing is essentially summarising bits of documents that the council's produced over the years, if you like. And then you reach a view at, let's 6.5.9, third line down. Do you see the essential point? The essential point that connects all of these documents above is that this is a sensitive area and it needs an appropriately balanced development.
Yeah.
Okay. Now just keep that in your mind. It's a sensitive area, you say, and it needs an appropriately balanced development. If we compare, just for the inspector's note, what Mr. Crawford's done on this important topic of sensitivity, keep your proof open, but turn to his proof at page 44. And at page 43, he starts looking at the landscape baseline. And at page 44, he's got a section that's called landscape sensitivity. Do you see?
Yep.
And as I say, he follows the Glivia 3 approach, if you like, of 8.2.4 of combining susceptibility to change with the value of receptor. And just to be clear, we've agreed that's not something you do, but you also do not look specifically at these ideas of susceptibility to change, nor do you look at these ideas of value in Glivia language, if you like.
It's kind of difficult for me because I'm not so familiar with to know exactly what that is.
Because you're not a landscape architect.
Exactly,
yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm not pretending to be. So
no, of course.
Without knowing what they are, I can't say whether I've
fair enough. But you certainly don't criticise them. You don't criticise Mr. Crawford's approach. Methodology.
No, I mean it seems like the standard way to do it.
So over the page, and the inspector can obviously read what he's done. You have read what he's done, no doubt. Over the page, he delineates at page 45 what the parcel is that he's thinking about on this topic of landscape sensitivity. Do you see? And he defines what the parcel is, he explains it, and then of course there's a plan, there's a figure at the back of his proof of evidence where you can see what it is that he's looking at when he's considering the sensitivity of the landscape. Yeah?
Yep.
And when you tell us in your proof this is a quote sensitive area, when you say that, you don't define what area it is that you're talking about. Yeah,
because I'm sort of collating together what has been discussed in 5-6 different documents.
That's the problem, but those documents are sometimes talking about different areas of landscape. So that's the point. When you say you think it's a sensitive area, when you're expressing your key judgment that you reach on the back of all those documents, you're not telling us what the area is, because all these areas are different, aren't they?
But they're all deemed to be sensitive.
But in differing ways to differing degrees. Right, so that's why everything's sensitive. It's a question of how sensitive. Yes. You might have one bit of a say for example, just hypothetically, you've got a large area of land. Doesn't matter how big. Let's say there might be bits of it that are really sensitive. There might be some bits of it that are only moderately sensitive. Some bits that are less sensitive or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. You appreciate that principle. So it's important then, isn't it, to understand if we say, all right, an area is sensitive. Well, all right. What's the area and how sensitive is it? Mm-hmm. You don't tell us either of those things. You just say there's an area and it's sensitive. We probably agree on that. You don't tell us what area you're analysing, and you don't give a view to the inspector on how sensitive it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. I haven't drawn a boundary that says this is the area I'm talking about, but I'm talking about the area of the site.
The site itself? Because it's interesting that you say that, because in all of the extracts that you draw out, are about much wider parcels of land that take us all the way down in the direction of Basildon.
Yeah, so the documents, the first ones, the LCAs, they talk about the wider area, the kind of area 25, and then it's the later ones where it gets the site sort of appraisals and the development
Fine.
potential that talk about the more focused.
The more
site.
focused. So what our inspector needs to be particularly interested in, you say, is when he comes to think about these evidence documents, if you like, from 2017, 2018, are the bits that look at not just the wider parcel. It's all important, obviously. You need to look at the wider parcel, but you need to look in particular at whatever bit of land you're talking about.
Yes, of course.
Fine. Okay, so we'll do that in a minute. Right. On pages 45 to 46, again, this is not a it's genuinely not a criticism, but it's important for the inspector to understand what he's got, if you like, from us and from you. When it comes to sensitivity, Mr. Crawford on page 45 works through a number of components, if you like, that go into that melting pot. He looks at quality, he looks at value, he looks at character sensitivity, landscape visual sensitivity, and then he reaches an overall view in respect of overall landscape sensitivity, and ends up reaching the view that the assessment parcel, see his figure that says what that is of low sensitivity. Now, obviously, obviously you disagree, I'm not sure, but to take it in stages, those are not, you've not followed those steps or any sort of comparable series of steps yourself.
No, I think we've probably ended up considering the same things. It's just that with this one, there's a very sort of clear structure with subtitles and recognizable terms. But I've definitely looked at quality, value.
Okay.
The other one, sorry, character sensitivity. I think we've covered.
Where do you look at value?
So the value of the view, I'm assuming that is. Sorry, I'm trying to paraphrase this one.
Have you read his proof before?
I have, but I can't remember everything.
No, fair enough. What we're talking about at the moment is the baseline characteristics of the landscape.
Yeah.
So what he's talking about is the value in landscape character terms of his defined assessment parcel. And you can see what he's talking about, and then that feeds into a conclusion on the landscape sensitivity being low. You said, oh well, yeah, I might not have gone through it in this very sort of regimented LVIA way. Fair enough, you're not a landscape architect, but you said, well, I've covered all the same stuff basically. Okay,
but I'm not saying to the same amount of detail, of course, because this is a much more detailed analysis. I'm not pretending I've done one of these. I'm just saying.
But have you covered? Fair enough.
Yeah.
So you've done it. You say not as detailed. Okay, the inspector can reach judgment on that. But have you done it? I mean, that's an open question. I mean, you say, all right, well, I've looked at landscape value. All right, then fine. Where have you done that?
So I've been looking at it through looking at the previous documents, which have there's numerous documents that appraise the landscape value of this.
Just show me. Area. I mean, in your evidence, where it is that. I mean, it's not a trick question because I don't think you've done these things, not even at a high level. Where I just don't think you've done it at all. I think that the answer might be, well, I didn't need to. I didn't think I'm not a landscape architect. I've just covered it in my own way, and I've reached, if you like, a sort of high level finding at 6.5.9 that this is a sensitive area. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's as far as it goes.
It's just drawn from these documents. I mean, there's I looked at the documents and I went to the site. Those are my two kind of
fine.
references.
So when I say to you then, when I say to the inspector in the end that you've not looked at things like the components of sensitivity, like landscape value, like landscape quality, what's the answer? I mean, is it just that you've done it sort of in your head, if you like?
Yeah, it's really difficult for me to say because I can't paraphrase this quick enough to tell you exactly. But my assumption would be the overall approach was looking to cover the similar things, but of course I haven't done it to the same level of detail.
Okay, fair enough. Yes,
I don't know what else to say.
No, not at all. So okay, so what you say is that I did it, if you like, but just not in this sort of detailed way. So fine.
Yeah.
So, but just to take it in stages, just a couple of points of detail. Mr. Crawford sets out at the top of page 46 of his proof what valued landscape means. I'm sure again this is all sort of old territory for you. But there's no allegation from the council that this is a quote unquote valued landscape within the meaning of para 174A of the MPPF.
Sorry, was there a question in there?
That was a question. Is it right that there's no allegation from the council that this is a quote unquote valued landscape within the meaning of para 174A of the MPPF?
Sorry, what's 174A exactly?
Okay,
Sorry, I don't
No,
have
don't
that
worry,
kind of
that's fine.
information in my head.
Keep that. No, of course, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Could you keep that paragraph open of Mr. Crawford, if you
Yeah, I
would?
have it here somewhere.
Keep that. Have you got? Oh, you've got it in hard copy. That's great. If you take out the MPPF, you've got the MPPF,
Yep.
which is core. If you're looking for a core document number, it's number 3.
Okay, so this is one about protecting and enhancing value.
Yeah. So there's a distinction drawn in national policy between 174A and 174B. 174A seeks to protect and enhance quote unquote valued landscapes, all sorts of high court cases about what that is and guidance about it, which is why I took to Mr. Crawford's proof. And then B is about we recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, which is to say all of it, you know, not just valued landscapes, but all countryside.
Yeah.
So my question to you is that the council's not, is it alleging that this is a quote unquote valued landscape, the meaning of national policy?
No, as far as I'm aware, no.
Okay. We agree that its character is at least partly suburban, as you've explained in your evidence in chief. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
So
It's not. Is it subject to any designations for its landscape quality, be they local, regional, or national?
no, not as I'm aware, no.
There's no, nor is it subject to any designation so far as its local townscape's concerned. So things like it's not in a conservation area, there's no relevant design code, etc.
Nope.
Its quality in terms of its townscape, as you described this morning, it's the type of the built form, the types of the built form, and their qualities are varied. Has a varied character.
Yeah, like the built form.
The built form, yeah, in the townscape.
Yeah.
The greenbelt designation has nothing to do with the qualities of the landscape.
Greenbelt designation has nothing to do with the qualities of the landscape. I feel that's difficult to ask that because I'm not involved in how greenbelt is designated.
Well, it's not difficult because we know what greenbelt designates. We know what its purposes are.
Yeah.
I can take you to them if you'd like. You've referred to them in your proof. Greenbelt's about the 5 purposes in the MPPF.
Yeah.
And keeping land open. It's about openness. But what greenbelt designation is not, so it's different from, say, something like an AONB or a national park or whatever, because those are designations that reflect the fantastic qualities of particular landscapes in landscape character terms. Greenbelt's not like that. It's a spatial designation. Are you with me?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Because there are bits of greenbelt land that are fantastic, fabulous to look at, rural in quality and all of that.
Yeah,
and there are bits of greenbelt
that it's serving, not necessarily the
exactly. It's a space. It's about its purpose. There are equally bits of greenbelt land that are scrubby, previously developed sites or whatever, and everything in between. So greenbelt on its own doesn't tell us anything about the quality of the landscape.
Yeah.
Okay. Or townscape.
Greenbelt on its own doesn't tell you anything about the value of the townscape.
Yeah. Doesn't tell us anything at all about the qualities either of the landscape or the townscape that surround this site.
That would be part of it, no.
It doesn't tell us anything about the extent of what you might call rurality.
Extent. I mean, it's a physical thing. It's a boundary. So if you're talking about extent, then it would.
No, the extent of of rural character or otherwise. The fact that you point at some land and say it's greenbelt doesn't tell us anything about whether that's a rural area, a suburban area, or somewhere in between.
It's edge of settlement, isn't it? So it's.
I'm not asking about our site. I'm asking about the greenbelt designation.
No, but my understanding of the greenbelt is that it's not settlement. There's a sort of line.
Or is it? It is in this case. Yeah, that's right. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to character, this is what the question's about: character of the landscape.
I don't think
it tells us
that
that
nuanced, is it? It's
no,
more
exactly.
kind of broad.
So it doesn't tell us. I think, and we agree. If you see us, on a map, an area is designated as greenbelt, we can't deduce anything about the character of that landscape simply from the greenbelt designation.
No, that's why you need to go to the site and have a look.
Exactly. All right then, good stuff. So in your proof of evidence in section 5.4.2, which is on page 18. You say that landscaping openness and natural features are particularly important on this site, as these are essential characteristics of the green belt and the countryside. Now, openness certainly is one of the important components and the essential components of the green belt. Landscaping and natural features have nothing to do with the green belt at all.
But they're quite typical of the countryside. And
That's not what you're saying. I mean, of course they're typical of the countryside, but that begs the question of what kind of a site is this? You're saying that landscaping and natural features are essential characteristics of two things, and one of them is the green belt. And I'm saying to you, not only are they not essential, they're completely irrelevant to green belt. And you've approached them as if they're part of it, the essential characteristics of the green belt designation.
I mean, maybe the word essential is a little bit overrun, but I think
How about irrelevant?
Landscaping, openness, and natural features. If someone said, "What are the characteristics of the countryside?"
But I'm not asking about the countryside.
The green belt, people would be like, "Well, I don't know, it's sort of green fields."
People would be wrong. That's the point. You've approached this on a sort of layperson's understanding of what the green belt is.
Right.
It's really important to unpick this, because we know, don't we? You and I know, although people might look at the word green and the phrase green belt and think, oh, well, you know, we're talking about rural Arcadian countryside. We know that it's a spatial designation that tells us nothing whatsoever about the landscape character.
We know that it's
Hang
about.
on, just before you answer, before you give the qualification, if you can, do you agree with what I've just said? And then qualify, obviously.
Sorry, you're gonna have to repeat.
Of course. No, don't worry. If we can, it's not easy, these back and forths when there's a lot of points running around. But if you could try where it's possible to give a yes or a no, and then qualify and say but, you know, whatever, and then I can just move through my questions much quicker. So people might think, oh well, it's got green in the title. Green belt connotes green. It connotes rurality or whatever, Arcadian, you know, countryside. But we know, don't we, that in fact the green belt designation tells us nothing about landscape character. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. You can qualify, of course, if you'd like to. So when you say that landscaping and natural features are essential characteristics of the green belt, so we can have a debate about whether they're essential characteristics of countryside. But when it comes to the green belt designation, we agree, I think, that they're not essential. They're not relevant to green belt designation at all.
I don't really know how you're saying relevant, because my understanding is that, you know, the purposes of the green belt prevent urban sprawl, keeping land permanently open.
Yeah.
So if land is open and it doesn't have urban sprawl, built development, it's usually natural. Like, it might be a bit of wasteland for sure, but if you don't have houses and factories and apartment buildings,
do you see no?
Then there tends to be vegetation, fields, landscaping, or landscape. Maybe there's confusion about the word landscaping, but
okay. So
the absence of development leads to natural features. That's what happens when you don't develop.
Yeah.
It's either farm.
That may well be. That could be right on some sites. Of course, it could, but it's got nothing to do with the essential characteristics of the green belt. Do you see? Just because you might find natural. Hang on.
Sorry.
Just because you might find some, natural features on some green belt land, which is obviously right in some places, not where you've got previously developed land that's in the green belt. But anyway, that doesn't tell us what the essential characteristics of the green belt are, and that's the reason I'm sort of taking this a little bit slower than you might think is worth doing, is because time after time earlier on this morning you were saying, well, in the end, what really matters is this is a green belt site, and what might be appropriate on a non-green belt site is not appropriate here. Do you remember? I'm paraphrasing it, but you said that several times today. And so it's important when you say that for the inspector to understand what you think a green belt site means. You think it means, I think, natural features and landscaping. Those are essential, you say, to what a green belt site is. What I'm suggesting to you is, and the countryside, absolutely. No, I know that. I've not asked you about that, because I'd agree that natural features, you find them in the countryside.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were okay. So it's just the green belt bit.
Because
the essential characteristics of the green belt, that's the bit that's contentious. Not
that's what I've asked about 5 or 6 times. So what's your answer? Do you maintain that landscaping and natural features are essential characteristics of the green belt? And if so, show me where you get that from.
No, I don't think they are essential characteristics.
Good.
But we're talking about this site.
We are, definitely.
And I think talking about this site, I think you know, there is landscaping. I'm not entirely sure of all the natural features, to be totally honest, but there is openness landscaping.
Good. No, we are talking about this site. I do promise I'm going to get to this site. I
Great.
promise. I'm just starting at these
Hypothetical.
questions of no, not hypothetical. But it's a question of principle.
Yeah.
Because the inspector's got to understand when you come to give your analysis of this site, what the basis is of that analysis.
Sure.
So, okay, fine, we're there. We're agreed on that bit. Now, in the end, Mr. Crawford goes through the exercise that he does on sensitivity, and he ends up finding, as I think you've just seen, that the landscape sensitivity of his assessment parcel is low. The level of landscape sensitivity is low. He says that at 8.2.15. You say, what do you say? You say back at where you deal with landscape character on page 31, you say, this is your page 31, you say it's a sensitive area. That was where we left off on the fourth line down on 6.5.9. We've been over the fact that the area, what the area means, if you like, in that sentence hasn't been crystallized, and nor has the degree of sensitivity that you're attributing to that area, but you just say it is sensitive, essentially. Yeah,
that's what I'm drawing from all of the documents that have appraised that site.
Yeah, and what else do you say? You say in the next paragraph that the site is relatively concealed, which you've been over this morning as to why you say that in terms of screening and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
We would agree, I think, that the fact that it is relatively concealed reduces its sensitivity to development.
Yeah.
I mean, are we in the end agreed? I mean, I don't know that in fact its sensitivity to development is low.
I think there's a little bit of a disagreement because there's a disagreement about how contained the site is.
Yeah, I'm not asking about the extent of containment then. Really, my question is all about sensitivity, right? So you say in the end, your essential point on the third line down on 6.5.9 is that the area, whatever that means, is sensitive. Okay, now actually, we agree because all sites are sensitive. There's always a sensitivity. So that the question that I'm trying to pin down is how sensitive. Now we agree that there is a suburban influence. You've been over in your evidence in chief. We agree that the site is relatively concealed, but we're not fully agreed on how concealed. Okay, yeah. So the inspector's got all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So let's tie it all together. Can he record in the end that it's agreed that the extent of the site's sensitivity is low? It's sensitive, sure, but how sensitive? The extent is low.
It's limited.
Limited, fine. Let's just
limited because it's concealed.
Understood. So we agree that the I think that might be the same as low. Do you anyway? I'll leave it. I think we've got
the same as low. I think.
Oh, it's not okay.
It's restricted, but it's still there. It's still a relevant point.
No, I think no. I'm going to have to. Sorry to be. This is going to sound really pedantic. I'm not asking you about the extent of the site's visibility. I'm asking you about its sensitivities. This is about how much it can accommodate new development, really, and how valuable it is. Those two things combined reach a view on sensitivity. I think we might actually be agreed. I'm not sure. That's why I'm treading carefully to try and work this out. You say there's some sensitivity. You said it's a sensitive area. Okay. Mr. Crawford works through his LVIA exercise, which you've not done. Absolutely fine. And he says in the end, okay, yes, there is sensitivity. And the extent of that sensitivity is low. Mm-hmm. Now, what's your evidence on whether he's right or wrong? Do you say yes, fair enough, it is low because of all these points about suburbanizing influences and well screened, the sensitivity, but I can see that it's low sensitivity to new development. Is that about it?
I think we're going around in circles, but I'm still going to refer to the council's appraisals.
The only reason
it was
answer the question. No. Well, you can only finish if you answer the question. So it's really got to be. I'm asking you a yes or no question. I've asked it.
You're asking me how I got to the conclusion.
No,
about
I'm not. Listen. I promise I'm not. I'm asking. I've explained a few times what Mr. Crawford says, right, about low sensitivity. Here's the question: do you agree with him or not? Yes or no?
I said no, and I said limited because I think it's. Oh, I'm going to say no.
Okay, you don't agree. Okay,
yeah.
Okay. So has he underplayed the sensitivity? Do you think? Because he said it's. Do you when you use the word limited? And again, I don't want to get lost here. Yeah. But do you say limited is something that the site's more sensitive than Mr. Crawford says it is?
Yeah. Where exactly in the? Just so I can see
Of course, of course.
Rather than just referring to one word.
Sure,
Is it
sure.
the
Where would you like me to
8.2
take you? In his,
8.2.15, is that where we are?
in terms of Mr. Crawford? Yeah, sure.
When you're
Sorry.
talking about the sensitivity, yeah. So
Yeah. Sure. It's yeah, exactly. But the overall conclusion is set out at 8.2.15, but obviously the section which we've just worked through together starts on page 44.
right.
Yes. Do you see 8.2.5 back at page 44? You have read this stuff before, haven't you? It's not the first time.
I'm sorry, it's very hard to sort of hold all of the information.
I'm
in
not
my
asking you
head.
to do that, because obviously you've got it right in front of you. It's just that
Yeah.
I don't want to give the sense that I'm ambushing you with these questions, because I'm just asking about, what we've said in our evidence. The 8.2.5, do you see Mr. Crawford starts off by looking at the appeal site, and he says at the bottom of that paragraph that all the criteria that he goes through are assessed as low, leading to an overall assessment that just the site itself, has a low landscape sensitivity. That's what the LVIA says, and then he says, I agree. Do you see? See what he said? What's said there? 8.2.
Yeah.
And then what happens next is that he turns from the top of page 45 to look at the assessment parcel, which is that wider area of land that he considers in his figure, goes through all those bits and pieces that we've all been over together, and he gets to the end at 8.2.15, and he says the landscape sensitivity of the assessment parcel is low. That's what he's saying. You keep using this word limited, and I don't know whether low and limited sound quite similar to me, so I don't know whether I'm missing something. Do you say that when Mr. Crawford finds that the site and the assessment area have low sensitivity, that he's wrong? You say he's wrong about that?
Yes.
Okay. You say that how great sensitivity do you say that they have to new development? So it's not low. What is it?
And I'm not allowed to say limited?
But you can if you want.
Right.
So,
I don't understand.
I don't understand what limited means. Are you saying that therefore? Yes, of course. Yes, that's what I'm asking you to.
Okay, so I haven't done the same process. As I say, mine was much more based on the appraisals.
We're going to go to the appraisals, but what do you mean?
This is my kind of evidence base, if you like. So I need to talk about them in order to explain to you where limited comes from.
Okay.
So can I just
before you go through them all, I'd really just when you use the word limited,
I can just briefly refer to the way.
Okay, sure. Please do.
I can't explain.
Of course, no. Please, I want you to be able to explain it. Of course.
Okay. So the reason I've come to limited is because in the documents that talk about firstly the sort of character of the site, and then suggest maybe it's okay for development. It's always presented as okay for development, but there's always a limit on it. There's a limit on the density, and there's also limits on, so I won't go into detail because you've asked me not to, but referring to the enhancement of buffer planting and recognition of the character of the area.
Yeah.
So I'm saying it has some sensitivity.
I know that. We're moving beyond some sensitivity. When you say limited, do you mean it's got limited capacity to take on new development? Is that what you're saying? What I'm trying to get to is limited higher or lower than low. We say low sensitivity, you say limited sensitivity. What does that actually mean?
If I said medium.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So then
medium
at least that tells us
level,
what you actually, okay, so you say medium sensitivity to new development, right?
Medium sensitivity to new development.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Great. Right. Okay. So the inspector's now got a sense, I think, as so far as sensitivity goes, where the sort of battle lines are drawn. We're at low, you're at medium. When you say medium, you mean the site itself, if you like.
Yes.
Yeah. And when we okay, fine. Now, with all of that behind us, let's have a look at how this site has been analysed by those others who have had a look at it over the years. Can we start with core document 27? And this is the core document 27, the 2017 landscape appraisals conducted by the Landscape Partnership for the council. It's the outline landscape appraisals of potential strategic development sites. You tell me when you're there.
The outline, such a long title, isn't it? Outline landscape proposals, the one from 2017. you said.
Bingo, that's the one. Now, if on page 32, PDF page 21, we turn to site 30, what is known as at this stage site 32. So it's PDF page 21, page 32.
Sorry, one sec. I have
No,
the
not at all.
wrong document open. So I only have the extract, which is
Yeah,
related
that's
to
fine.
that. Is that fine? Okay.
Turn on to page 20, PDF page 21, paginated page 32.
Got it.
Lovely. So this is the beginning of the analysis of what's called site 32. Are you there? It should say site 32 at the top. We can see at the bottom of each page that this analysis was conducted for the council by the Landscape Partnership. Do you see?
Yep.
A well-recognised firm of landscape architects. Are you aware of that?
Yeah,
You might not
that's
be.
fine.
Fine. Okay. All right. So let's see what they say about it. This is one of the documents, I should say, the inspector would have seen. This is one of the documents that you rely on in your evidence to reach your view about sensitivity.
Yes,
that you do.
right.
Okay. So site 32 introduced on page 32, as we've seen. If we could turn through the analysis, most of it's just sort of factual sort of descriptions, if you like, of the site and its characteristics. Its key features are listed at page 37, PDF page 26. Its key features include, are you there, I should say? Are you a series of bullet points? The first one's that level topography. Yeah?
Yep.
Second one's the paddock.
Yep.
The buildings is the third one. Well-hedged boundaries is the fourth one, down to the north, the west and the south.
Yep.
So just pausing on that one, you've given your analysis this morning about the extent to which the site is screened to the west and also to the south. We know what the Landscape Partnership thought about it, which is that it's well hedged to the north, the west and the south.
Yeah, so it's low. It's the hedging, it's low.
Sorry? I'm just asking that's your view. The Landscape Partnership's view is that it's that these are well hedged boundaries, including the boundary to the south.
Yeah, sorry, do you want me to clarify the point, or would you rather I did it after? Or we were talking about comparison of the west and the south. So the west has quite a lot of height and a lot of density, whereas the south is quite limited.
Right. Oh, okay. So
it's more hedges, so it's quite a low, if you imagine a two-story building, you might have quite a lot of it.
Fine.
So, yeah, where they say well hedged, it is well hedged.
Good. So we agree it's well hedged. You say it's not as tall as the hedges to the west. Views from adjacent residential properties, and then the penultimate one about being well screened from wider views, and then no public rights of way or roads across the site.
Yeah.
All of that, I suppose, is all pretty factual stuff, really. But we could probably agree on those as important features for the inspector to take away when he's considering landscape character.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So far, so good, if you like, between us. Page 38 reaches a series of conclusions about greenbelt purposes, and I'm not going to ask you about greenbelt purposes because I understand it. That bit of the pie, if you like, is given to Miss Cook, so I'll talk to her about greenbelt purposes, but just noting that it's there, and we'll come back to it tomorrow. But page 39, I think, is relevant to you. Page 39 explains the features which led to Area 25 as a whole being assessed as an area with no or very low relative landscape capacity to accommodate development. You see?
Yep.
And then it turns to our site under the heading Site Sensitivity.
Yep.
The enclosure afforded by the perimeter hedges means that site 32 is considerably less open to public view than area 25 as a whole. Just pausing there, that's obviously right, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. next is, given its small footprint to the rear of existing properties, and its given its location, I misread that, to the rear of existing properties and its small footprint, it's considered to make only a limited contribution to maintaining the separation of Great Bursted, or indeed South Green and Noak Hill. Is that something on which you give any evidence on, or is that more for Ms. Cook, this idea about settlement separation?
Sorry. Yeah, I think that's more with Louise.
Yeah, okay, fine. So it has a greater capacity to accommodate development than Area 25 as a whole.
Yeah.
And again, that's what the Landscape Partnership is saying, but that's also something that we agree on, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's a diagram on the right-hand side of the page, figure 4 landscape sensitivity. And the conclusion is that with the exception of the, well, I suppose the western edge, the southern edge, and the southwestern corner triangle bit, those are areas of higher landscape sensitivity, but the rest of the site is all designated or found to be an area of lower landscape sensitivity. Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to say that I'm still allowed to have my own opinion, but this is...
Oh, of course. No.
Going to the site and being myself, so that's why I've come with...
Of course. No. I mean, it's I wouldn't for a moment say that you can't have your own opinion, but you made very clear that you didn't do your own LVIA analysis, setting out all of your criteria, just the way Mr. Crawford did. What you did was you took account of all of these historic documents and you reached a view that the site has medium sensitivity. So what I'm trying to do is to work through them with you to see whether or not that's, what they say. And so far, we've got a finding from Landscape Partnership, a firm of landscape architects, that the area of the site where we're actually proposing to put things is an area of lower landscape sensitivity, right?
Okay, yep.
And so I think your point then is that, well, I'm entitled to disagree, and I do, I think.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and then it falls to the inspector to give weight to what you say versus what the Landscape Partnership says. But you didn't, in your written evidence, tell us that you were departing from the views of the Landscape Partnership. What you said was that you were relying on them to reach your view about sensitivity. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
So this idea about you sort of, I disagree and I'm entitled to, is that something that's just happened now, or did it happen when you wrote your proof?
So I guess when I was looking at the site, it's a bit more of a kind of holistic.
Yeah.
I haven't done this kind of LVA sort of
No, of course
rigid
not.
process.
Sure.
And when I'm talking about sensitivity, naturally, I'm an architect. There's a lot more kind of that's floating around in my head.
It's floating around in your head.
In terms of sensitivity. So I'm not talking about, taking a picture and looking at the height of the hedges.
Yeah, no, let's just try and cut this down. I'm not asking you about any of that stuff, the things that are floating around. What I'm asking you about is, you now say, and it's absolutely, you're perfectly entitled to, you say to the inspector, I disagree with what the Landscape Partnership find about the extent of the site sensitivity. Okay, so that's what you've said. Right. My question is simply, has that just happened now, or is that something that happened when you were writing your proof of evidence?
No, I was writing my proof because I was making a judgment. That's what the proof is.
No, come on. You please try and answer the question. I know you've got a lot going on, but my question is, you now say that you're disagreeing with the landscape architects who were appointed by the council to appraise this site for its development potential. You're perfectly entitled to. I'm not saying that you can't. You reach your own view. Everyone can reach their own view. My question's about timing. When did you reach the view that you were departing from the view of Landscape Partnership on site sensitivity? Was it today, just now, when I pointed it out to you that you were doing something different to them, or was it when you were writing your proof?
So I wrote in my proof that this is a sensitive area. So in that point,
Please answer the question.
I'm sorry.
But please, I don't, because this is going to honestly, I didn't. This will take. It's one or the other. I don't mind which, but
I did it when I was writing my proof.
Right,
But you've
fine.
made it. Yeah.
So when you wrote your proof, you understood that when you were expressing a view on site sensitivity that departed from that which was set out by the Landscape Partnership in the 2017 study, right?
Okay.
Is it right, or have I got it wrong? I'm desperate for an answer.
Well, I didn't sit there and I don't know, it's really hard to say. I was making a judgment. I've looked at a lot of different documents. I've been to the site. I'm making a judgment.
I know that, but you either, this is really simple. I don't know how to sort of go forward if you're not going to answer this question, because right. Landscape partnerships set out a judgment, right, on landscape sensitivity. It's their judgment, not yours, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you read that when you're writing your proof, okay? You either agree with it or you disagree with it. We all either agree with it or disagree. We're all entitled to our own judgments, okay? You read it and you say, no, they've got this wrong. I disagree. They've undercooked it because it's not lower.
Okay.
So have I got it right so far?
Yeah, okay. So I think I understand what you're saying now. Basically, I think my reaction to some of these documents is that someone was writing a document because they wanted to put forward a site. And so perhaps they had kind of cooked it in a slightly different way to the way that I would. So yes, I would say in my proof, I was reading this document and thinking, I think this site is more sensitive than is outlined here.
I don't think I'm going to get anything from what you think they had in their mind when they were writing this document.
Yeah. Let's move on from the cooked bit.
Yeah.
But you thought when you were writing your proof, you thought I disagree with landscape partnership.
Yes, if you like, yeah.
Okay, well, it's not if I like. I'm just honestly
Yes.
okay. Yes, right. So where on earth in your proof do you explain that? Because far from saying I have read what the landscape partnership say and I disagree with them, they've undercooked it or whatever, you say that my view on sensitivity is the essential point that connects all of the documents above. You're relying on them. You're not departing from them.
Okay, sorry, I'm not really sure what to say without reading the other documents and what I can't remember what sensitivity
we're going to go through some of them.
Okay, sure.
It'll take ages, but I'm just asking about one at a time. It turns out, I think this is where we're at. I mean, in the end, it is what it is. You are now saying that you disagree with the landscape partnership's view on sensitivity. You didn't tell us that in your proof. You've set out absolutely no methodology for why you differ or the extent to which you differ, and you're essentially telling us in the last 15 minutes for the first time about the extent of that disagreement.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Back to the landscape partnership. So we disagree, well, you disagree with them on, we agree with them. You disagree with them on sensitivity. Moving on to potential development areas. So we're back in the landscape partnership on page 40. Now, landscape partnership document, that's called document 27. Page 40, PDF page 29. There's a heading, recommendations. You see?
Yep.
Okay. We get, don't we, potential development areas. That's the second thing down. Potential development areas, having regard to its relatively small footprint, its visual containment from the wider landscape by established hedges, its connection with the existing built edge of South Green, and its limited contribution to delivering greenbelt purposes. It's considered that Site 32 is of lower landscape sensitivity. So there what we're getting is the landscape partnership, if you like, drawing it all together to explain that purple or pinkish shading on the previous plan. Yeah? So that's their view. You disagree, apparently. Yeah?
Yep, sorry, just to work out what it was saying, lower sensitivity in comparison to
the bits with greater
sunshine,
sensitivity, which they also outline on the plan.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, jolly good. So that's what they say. You disagree. And they say, given that these attributes apply to the whole site, it's further considered that the level of sensitivity would be consistent throughout. I suppose maybe you do agree with that bit, that the site, if you like, there's a sort of pretty uniform level of sensitivity across what is a pretty small site.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. The typical densities for the development are set out at typically at 30 to 35 dph. Do you see?
Yep.
And then in the top right hand corner, there's approximate number of dwellings set out if the site area were a hectare. If the site area that was developable was a hectare, they apply a density of 35 dph.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what they're deciding is either acceptable or unacceptable in this document.
35 dwellings.
Okay. Well, 35 dph, isn't it? I mean, it's expressed that's done by by applying a sort of approximate density to what they assume to be the developable area.
Yeah, but it's also saying the approximate number of dwellings.
What's our density for this scheme? Do you remember?
It's 32, isn't it? Because it's over 1.478,
Okay.
47 dwellings.
All right. Well, there we go. Now, back in your proof of evidence, where you're talking about this topic of countryside character and appearance, you say, I've read it to you already, actually, your 6.5.10 on page 31, that the relatively concealed nature of the site is the main characteristic, which led to its identification as potential for development. Obviously, the inspector can see all the things that were identified in the landscape partnership report. However, you say this works both ways. It may, you say, be limited in what it visually detracts from its sensitive context, but the scheme as proposed is also limited in what it adds. Yeah?
Yep.
The harm, I think, that you're sort of alleging is all about detracting from a context that you consider to be of moderate sensitivity or medium sensitivity.
Yep.
Okay. That's what the harm is, I think.
Just to be clear, so the moderate sensitivity, that was when we were talking about the site itself. If we're
think
talking
so.
about harm, we would be talking about outside of the site.
As well. Fine. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Well, I suppose here what we're talking about in this sentence is the context, isn't it? So we must be talking about the things that surround the site as well. You consider that context is sensitive, and you consider that our scheme will visually detract from that sensitive context. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. But you say the extent of that detracting is limited.
Yeah, because it's screened, as we've established.
So if the harm that we're talking about, which is detracting from sensitive context on your case, obviously we don't agree with the way you put it, doesn't matter, I'm trying to understand your case.
Mm-hmm.
You say that there's a detracting going on here, Inspector. It's detracting from a sensitive context. That's some harm that I allege.
Oh.
And if the inspector says, okay, well, what extent of harm do you allege? The answer is limited. See 3 lines down in this paragraph.
Yep.
So that means that on your analysis, the extent of harm to this, what you call the sensitive landscape context, is limited.
Yes, because the screen is the other side screen. Yeah.
So I thought we'd agree on that. So in the end, then maybe there's nothing else to say, because if we agree on the fact that the harm to the landscape context is limited, then there's not much between you and Mr. Crawford. You said in your oral evidence just now, you were asked about the extent of harm to character and appearance, and you said that harm would be moderate. You remember saying that?
Yeah.
Now, let's just, again, I don't want to sort of fall out of the difference between limited and moderate. That does seem to me to be a different word that connotes something greater. Not only do you not call it a moderate landscape character harm in your proof, which you don't, it's totally inconsistent with what you do say in your proof, which is that the extent of impact will be limited.
So you're going to have to rephrase that.
Is it not correct that it's right that number one, you don't call it moderate anywhere in your proof?
Yep.
Correct. So it's something that you've come up with in the last sort of 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, when we were discussing.
Yeah. So it's not on your proof, but number two, what you do say in your proof is that this detracting from context is only going to be limited, not moderate, limited.
So I'm spinning things around a little bit here. So
I think so.
About just trying to get my.
If it helps, I think there's 2 things here that I need to note down. One is your position on sensitivity, which I have.
She's got that now.
But then now it's your position on harm.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So harm, we've agreed on harm. I thought we'd agreed anyway, that the extent of harm to landscape context, which is what I just asked you about, is limited. And we agreed that because that's exactly what you say at the 3rd line down at 6.5.10. So fine. So I said, happy days, we can move on. But actually then in your oral evidence, you were asked this question by my learned friend and you said, no, moderate. So and we've agreed that you don't say moderate anywhere in your proof. So that's where we're at. And now what I'm saying is not only do you not say moderate in your proof, saying moderate today on the hoof is totally inconsistent with what you do say in your proof, which is limited. So do you see what I'm asking? It is inconsistent, isn't it? What you said earlier on today.
Yeah, so it's, I don't know, limited and moderate. It's moderate adverse because it's limited. So when I said this morning, I said it was moderate adverse because of the concealed nature of the site, which is the same thing that limits the effect it has on the context.
I feel you properly lost me now. It's moderate because it's limited.
Are you trying to say limited the extent of its? Are you trying to say that it's limited in the sense that because it's so well screened, it can't be viewed from that far away? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I mean by limited.
As opposed to an overall grading of harm.
Oh, okay.
And then you separately say the overall grading of harm is moderate. That's how I'm understanding.
Is that it? Has the inspector got it?
Yes.
Qualifying,
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
No,
Right.
then it's totally my fault for not catching on the drift quicker. So it's. I do struggle to read that in the context of what you say. You say it may be, so it, i.e., the scheme may be limited in what it visually detracts from its sensitive context. What is that word limited doing there, if not explaining the extent of harm?
Yes, I think that was a simple question, which is, I think that's what I understand is what you're saying on the stand.
Oh, I see.
That isn't what I think is what's written in 6.5.7.
I mean, again, look, if you want to say
Mhm.
this is my view now, it doesn't reflect what I said in my proof, then that's fine. But it is what you've said in your proof.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm just trying to work out, the words.
Yeah, trying to work out the words is the tricky bit.
It may be limited in what it visually detracts from it. Yeah, so I'm saying it's limited because it's screened, which is what I've said. So the relative concealed nature of the site is the main characteristic.
Yeah, okay. You say it's limited because it's screened, but just so I know this must feel to you like we're taking ages, but I am trying to burn down into what that word limited actually does mean in your view. And that so when you say last go, and then I'll just leave it to the inspector to try and work it out. When you say it, so the scheme may be limited in what it visually detracts from its sensitive context. Well, how I read that, just how I read it, is that the extent of detraction, is that the right word? The extent of harm to landscape context is limited. That's what I thought you meant.
I see. I can see why that's confusing. Yeah, it meant because I was when I was writing the sentence, I was talking about the concealed nature of the site, and therefore how that limits the amount that it can visually detract. Which is what
it's fine.
I said verbally this morning.
Okay, so is where we're at then, is the inspector got it right, I think then. So you're saying you identify an overall moderate adverse effect, although I say you identify today an overall moderate adverse effect, but over a limited geographical area of essentially what the site itself.
Hang on, sorry. So now you've gone into the talking about just the site.
Okay. That you identify, is this correct? A moderate adverse landscape effect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Over a limited area. That's you now tell us the word limited's doing in that sentence, I think. I mean, it's not supposed to be this hard. I promise.
I don't know why it's so hard.
I'm trying to understand. I'm not even trying to question you. I'm trying to just understand what it is that your case is. So I think what you're saying is, right, overall landscape effect, adverse, right? Yes?
Yes.
To a moderate degree.
Yes.
So it's not low adverse, it's not substantial adverse, it's somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
And the extent of that adverse effect will be felt in a limited area, because that's what I'm
I really want to agree with you so we can move on, but the word limited for me is what I said this morning, where the amount that the site is concealed limits the impact it has. So therefore, if it has an adverse impact, it can only be a moderate adverse impact because it's limited.
Okay.
Does that make
I'll
sense?
leave it. Thank you very much. I'll leave it for the inspector to puzzle out. Thank you very much. Okay, nothing more on character and appearance. Happy days, right? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I'm happy to. We're definitely well over halfway there, sir. I mean, I'm happy if you are. I mean, also if you want, Miss Bevan, to just keep asking questions. But if you want a short break now, so we're about to do openness instead. So
Yes.
a change of tack.
Perhaps we do have a short break now,
Sure.
actually, because it is sort
Yeah,
of halfway
that's
through
okay.
the afternoon.
Sure.
It's a
Absolutely.
natural break anyway. Is 15 minutes okay with everybody?
More than enough. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, you will be in Paris, so you can't talk to anybody.
Yeah, that's fine.
Break. Obviously, people can bring you drinks and things, but just can't talk
I'm
about
allowed
the
to leave
case.
the room, right?
Yes, you can go to the toilet.
Someone chained me down.
Well, some witnesses do just stay at the table, but it's not, as long as you don't talk to people about the case. That's the
Yeah,
only
no,
thing.
that's fine.
You're allowed to talk to our lot as well.
No offense.
is resumed. Mr. Simons.
Thank you very
That's
much
you.
indeed. Righto. So thank you very much for those answers on character and appearance. But I'll ask you a few questions about openness now, which is one of the other things on which you give evidence. So back in your proof, I'd ask you questions about pages 30 and 31, which is where you deal with character and appearance. You deal with openness over the page on page 32, and then you, after dealing with that, you turn to your conclusions at the bottom of page 32. Is that right? Now, just to orient ourselves, though, would you mind just turning back to page 30? And the reason for that is that at page 30, you've got helpfully, I think, on there a plan of, it might be a bit blurry on, maybe the inspectors is a bit blurry, but at the bottom left of page 30, there's the plan that shows what area 25 is.
Yeah.
If you're after inspector a slightly better one, not that one, more zoomed up one, maybe could I take you to keep that open, keep your proof open, but take out core document 26.
Yes.
Core document 26, if you turn in it to PDF page 22, paginated page 18. We can see there, hopefully that one's a bit easier to read maybe. Figure 3 at the bottom of that, page 18.
Okay.
Are you there as well, just by the way, if that's all right, Ms. Bevan, that Greenbelt study, Core Doc 26, page 18, PDF page 22, sorry. So figure 3 shows us all these assessment parcels.
Sorry, I'm not in the right place. So this is the landscape study volume 2?
Yeah, no. So it's core document 26, which is the 2018 Greenbelt topic paper.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. October 18, and if you once you get there, turning it to page 18, PDF page 22. Just keep that sort of open if you like. Okie dokie.
You sure? Is it this map?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. All right. So that's just it's a different colours, but we can see what area 25 comprises, because in section 6.5, when you're dealing with character and appearance, toward the bottom of page 30, you start talking about area 25. 6.5.4, you talk about area 25. 6.5.5, you talk about area 25 as well, and indeed over the page at 6.5.6, etc. Yeah. And then at this bit where you turn to openness of the green belt, harm to openness, which on page 32, you say, as summarised in 6.5, area 25 plays a critical role in preserving the openness of the green belt, right?
Yeah.
To which the answer is, well, it might do, but area 25 is massive. Area 25, isn't it? Goes, well, without getting technical about it, but it's more than half, I think, of the way between Billericay and Basildon. It's area 25, then you've got area 22, and then you hit Basildon.
Yeah, it's a large area, but it's
big. Yeah. And we are, I mean, you could sort of tell on this green plan where we are, because we are nestled between the sort of what's the right word? The sort of sticking out, almost like the little peninsula at the top right-hand corner of area 25. You can see where we are, where our site sits, and we are not. We are within that corner, aren't we? We don't extrude beyond the southern existing boundary of that peninsula.
No.
So we are. What's the right way of putting it? Can we agree on it being we're a very, very limited portion of a wide area?
Yes. Okay.
So the fact that area 25 may play a critical role, so you say, in preserving the openness of the green belt, don't tell us anything about the role that our site may or may not play.
Yeah, but it's why I go on to site.
Sure. I'm just taking it in stages, as I say, but we agree on that. Area 25. Well, anyway, you've given your answers on that. Then you say in some documents, site 32 is permitted a certain degree of independence.
Yes.
Okay. So let's have a look at what's said then about site 32 as distinct, if you like, from area 25. But before we do, just on the, it was still within this Greenbelt study, on page 34 of it. Do you see there's a page 34, there's a heading towards the bottom, it's PDF page 38. There's a heading at 5.4, the nature and extent of harm to the Greenbelt.
Yep.
And the Greenbelt review concludes that, this is the council's review of the year before, concludes the vast majority of Greenbelt in Basildon contributes towards the openness and at least one of the purposes of including land within the Greenbelt, at least partially.
Yep.
So again, when the inspector comes to think about the importance or not of area 25, he should remember, shouldn't he, that, well, all of it, or the vast majority of it in Basildon does make a contribution towards openness.
Yes.
And therefore, you see the second sentence, there'll be inevitable harm arising from development land within the current extent of the Greenbelt, right?
There will be inevitable harm arising from development. Yes.
Yeah, because that's what openness, the way it works, is that it has that spatial dimension. If you take a field and you put a building on it where there was no building before, you have harmed openness because there's a volumetric intrusion into that field, right? So the council's position is that there'll be harm. There'll inevitably be some harm, but you see in the next sentence, the nature and extent of harm varies from site to site, right? And that will depend on a number of things: size of site, location of site, topography, landscape, visual prominence, and the extent of Greenbelt that will remain after development has occurred and the ongoing purpose that will serve in A, B, C, and D on that page. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, that's the general approach. And let's see what the council had to say about a site-by-site assessment looking at those criteria about our site, about the appeal site. And we get that analysis in this document from page 58, PDF page 62. You should have in the middle of that page 58 in the table on the far left hand side, it's called New Site 3, land west of Southend Road, Maitland Lodge. Yeah?
Sorry, yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to ask that question as you were sipping your tea.
Yeah.
So the first few columns relate to Area 25 as a whole.
Yep.
And then we get to a consideration of the proposed site that the inspector's thinking about,
Yes.
from and under the heading at the top, harm likely to arise. Yeah. So the first paragraph starts, Area 25 makes a significant contribution to the Greenbelt, etc. We know what Area 25 includes.
Yep.
Next paragraph. Now, the proposal would see a small portion of the northeastern corner of the Greenbelt land, Greenbelt area developed. So that first criterion of size, we know what we think. We are a small portion of the northeastern corner of this Greenbelt area. Yeah?
Yes.
Now, in terms of location, we are told that the site is connected. We see it's visually contained by well-established hedges to the northwest and south. We've been over all of that. And it's connected to the existing built edge of South Green to the east.
Yep.
In terms of its topography, we're told about its relative flatness compared to the surrounding wider slopes, mean that it's a site which is well screened from wider views.
Yep.
Now, what about its landscape and visual prominence? It's got, do you see, considerably less open to public view than Area 25 as a whole. Having regard to the site's limited visual influence on the wider landscape, development would be unlikely to impact the setting and special character of the conservation area.
Yep.
And the next comment is about the separation between Billericay and Basildon, but that I think is one that goes probably more to Greenbelt purposes, so I'll leave that one for tomorrow. I'll come back to that issue tomorrow. But therefore, and again, I'm not asking you about purposes, just the openness bit here. it's considered that this development proposal will have limited harm on the openness of the green belt, right?
Yep.
So that's the conclusion that's being reached by the council's green belt assessment so far as harm likely to arise. So far as mitigation of harm, we're told that the site's already significantly visually contained by existing landscape features, which should be retained and enhanced. Yeah.
But you say that are being retained and enhanced.
I'm saying I'm just reading out what it says, just noting what's being recommended. We should retain what's there and enhance what's there. Is what's being said, and then the role of the remaining green belt would remain unchanged. Yeah.
So where are you reading?
I'm so sorry. The final column, role of remaining green belt, and then it says would remain
I was
unchanged.
expecting you to read the rest of that paragraph in mitigation of harm, but yeah, it does finish saying would remain unchanged. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So what's happened here is that the council has taken the original assessment for Area 25 as a whole, and it has applied a site-by-site analysis, not just to this site, but to a number of other sites. And it's gone through all of those criteria that we just went through earlier in the document. And it's reached a view. And the view is that there'd be limited harm to greenbelt openness, and that the role of the remaining greenbelt would remain unchanged.
Yep.
Okay. That's what this document is telling us. Right. And I mean, I suppose my question is, do you accept those findings, or is this another one where you see what's said there, but you're entitled as an architect to your own point of view and you sort of take a different one? Not asking about purposes, as I say, but just so far as the openness side of it goes, which is your evidence.
I'm a little bit confused about, because we sort of missed the section of this whole paragraph, which is more related to what I would be discussing.
Sure, please,
So,
read it all, but by all means, I didn't mean to not miss bits out.
Fine. So it's after, so it is recommended that these are retained and enhanced. So sorry, it's recommended that the landscape features are retained and enhanced.
Absolutely.
And the design of the development on this site is complementary to the site character.
Yes.
In order to ensure any harm arising from the development on this site is minimised.
Absolutely. So we've been over design, which is why I didn't read it out. What I'm asking about now is greenbelt openness, which is a different topic, although I appreciate your view is that design feeds into that analysis, which is absolutely fine. So all I'm asking about really is to do with the conclusions on openness that flow out of this document, both on openness and also the role of the remaining green belt. Maybe I'll take it in stages.
My scope is about the impact of design on openness. So I think openness in a broader sense will be covered by Louise.
Oh, really?
I'm talking about the impact of design on openness. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly that was that's certainly the way.
So do you have a view then? If not, then maybe I need to ask some of these questions to Mrs. Cook tomorrow. Do you have a view or not then on the extent of harm that would be caused as a result of to openness, greenbelt openness, as a result of the scheme, as in the round or not?
In reference to design.
Do you? Well, the problem is that when we get to Ms. Cook's statement, when it comes to working out how much harm there is, she actually takes us back to you. That's why I was going to ask you about it. You say at 4.29 of her evidence says cross-reference should be made to you, and then goes into what you say about design. So what I'm asking you about is, do you, and I'll ask her about openness tomorrow, obviously that's the way that the council's case is teed up, that's fine, although I thought I was supposed to be asking you about openness, at least to some extent. When it comes to overall harm to openness, do you give the inspector any evidence or not as to what the extent of harm is? You say in your proof it'll be less open than it was, but I'm paraphrasing. There will be harm to openness, and you say, for example, 6.6.3 of your proof, page 32. It is evident that a development of this scale cannot avoid impacting the openness of the greenbelt. Well, yeah, I mean, we all agree with that, and we've said that, and you know, there's common ground that there'll be an impact on openness. But if I try and prod you a little bit further and say, all right, we agree that there's harm to openness. Is it limited harm? See the greenbelt study that I've just taken you through. Is it absolutely shocking great harm? Is it medium harm? Is it low harm? You know what I mean? On the extent of harm, Do you have a professional view on that, or is that not something you've thought about?
Sorry, again, I'm just trying to keep this line between design matters and otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit hard to, I didn't want to sort of end up in what we ended up with the last section where there was sort of confusion about.
You have, I mean, to be
semantics.
sort of almost, he says, to be fair to myself, to be fair to me, you've done a section called Harm to Openness of the Greenbelt on page 32. And you said, from assessing the proposal, it's evident that development of this scale can't avoid impacting the openness of the Greenbelt, even taking consideration of the portion of PDL there being increased footprint and height visible from beyond the boundary, even if more substantial enhanced buffer planting were to be provided. So you're thinking, aren't you, in this proof, I assume, about openness and that there'll be a harm to openness. You say the harm will flow as a consequence of all the stuff you've been talking about design-wise, right? So all I'm asking about is, have you applied your mind to how much harm you say will flow to openness? Will that harm be limited? And I'm not asking about design harm, I'm asking about openness, because that's what the topic of this cross-examination now is. Harm to the openness of the Greenbelt. We've seen what the council's evidence base thinks about the likely impacts of development on this site, so far as openness goes, but i.e. limited harm to openness. But what do you think? Or do you not have any evidence on that at all?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask my question again, which is, are you talking about that just in terms of this subheading of design? Is that because I'm
There's
happy
no
to
subheading of design.
well, everything I do is under the subheading of design, so I just want to check that that's the understanding. Because obviously there's impacts of openness.
So, okay, so is the answer then the broader question of no, it's not about separation, it's about openness. So is the answer that I should target it's very difficult because you both talk about openness,
yeah.
But the problem is that she relies on you for her, Miss Cook relies on you for her, some of her conclusions on the extent of harm. So then I go to your proof and I say, right, okay, well then what does Mrs. Bevan say about openness, right? And you say that there'll be impact on openness, see 6.6.3, right?
Yeah.
You say it cannot avoid impacting on the openness of the Greenbelt. And then we think, right, okay, well that's an important conclusion. There'll be an impact on openness. So the council's telling us. How great is that impact in your view?
If I may, sorry to interrupt.
No. Sure.
I think it is, certainly in my mind, our thoughts in the inspector's mind quite clear that openness in general terms is dealt with by Ms. Cook. That aspect of it which we say is affected by design is dealt with by Ms. Bevan.
I don't think it is clear there, because 6.6.3 to my mind does go into general questions of openness when it talks about volume and proportion of PDL and other things. Those aren't detailed design specific comments. So I think I do need clarification on this.
It's not detailed design, but it's design.
What's design? When you said, let me just put it this way, hopefully a simple bash at it. You say, right, your own sentence, first sentence 6.6.3 cannot avoid impacting on openness, right?
Yeah.
So your view, there is an impact on openness. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
How big?
The impact on openness in terms of design.
No, in terms of, quote, a development of this scale.
In terms of a development of this scale, I would say is limited. Am I allowed to say limited?
Thank you very much. You certainly can, yeah. So your view is that the impacts on openness of the Greenbelt of a development of this scale, there'd be an impact, it would be of a limited extent, as it were.
Yes.
Just one moment, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You now have time for re-examination, if you would like to, Mr. Atkinson.
Just got 1 point. Do you remember you asked that with the meaning of limited?
Never going to use that word again after today.
I understand that.
Yeah, go on.
in the context of character and appearance, and you were taken to, in what I'm calling the Site 32 analysis, that seems to use its way to reference it, which is the landscape partnership 2017 document.
Called up 27.
Yeah. And you were taken within that to the page, the internal page 39.
Yeah.
And the section on site sensitivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what that paragraph says is that the site 32 is less open to public view than area 25 as a whole.
Yeah.
In its location, small footprint, and greater capacity. And then your attention was drawn to the two shades at the low.
Yeah.
In the drawing. Higher landscape sensitivity and lower landscape sensitivity. Is, in your judgment, is lower the same as low?
I think that isn't the map saying that the edge is more sensitive because it's on the edge, it's more visible, it's closer to the fields, and the inside of the site that's closest to the built environment is lower. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't say high and low, it says higher and lower, which suggests that they're kind of balancing those two things against each other. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, yes. Okay. You will then, this is the final question, context now, openness. You're taken to your 663.
Yeah.
Where you make some remarks about openness generally. In the following paragraph, you focus on design, and that bears on openness. So you're at 64.
Mm-hmm. How would you say those paragraphs should be read in your proof? The two paragraphs, you mean? The 6.3 and 6.6.4. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I think 6.6.3, it does sort of stray outside of strictly design. It's a bit more of a kind of general note as raised. But it's sort of trying to give the overview that, as we've established, development of this scale cannot avoid impacting the openness. So as a starting point, just having development impacts the openness. And then references the kind of the extent of the footprint and the volume and height. Sort of setting the scene on a very high level. And then the next paragraph is looking to sort of break that down into more detailed design points, which hopefully I covered in our initial evidence in chief, but giving examples of how design can affect openness in terms of layout, green infrastructure, the extent of hard landscaping, car parking, dominance of cars, and again going back to the roof lines and sort of public spaces. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I think I'm saying that there's one paragraph which is sort of quite high level, establishing that there is development here and there's harm, and then more sort of detailed design comments to illustrate how that is that harm is made worse by aspects of poor design.
Harm is made worse. Harm to what?
Sorry, harm to the openness. So there's one stage which is building on a site that is currently open, putting volume there, impacts on its openness, but it's the way that you do that. It could be done in a way that is more sensitive. But there's examples pulled out here of ways that the proposal carries out itself, has elements of design which don't help this situation, and exacerbate the harm. Sort of going back to the reasons for refusal, areas of disagreement, exacerbate the harm, fail to provide high quality, beautiful place, add to the quality of the area. How the design, including layout and appearance of the proposed development, impact the greenbelt.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a bit of time now. Is it possible to do the affordable housing now, or are people not prepared, or are the right people not in the room?
I'll tell you what we'd anticipate.
Okay.
But I mean, we can certainly perhaps just take a couple of minutes to discuss that.
Yeah.
But we'd anticipated that we could do Mrs. Cooking in Chief this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
Not cross-examine.
Okay.
And because I'm sure we won't have time really to get into
Yeah.
cross-examination until tomorrow, but that would at least give, that might take us.
Till 5.
Till 5.
Okay.
So that would be something we could do, or if you prefer, we can just take a couple of minutes and discuss that affordable round table.
I honestly don't mind. Just as long as we use the time, so I don't want to not use it.
Probably good go with
Okay.
if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Obviously take a few minutes if you want to get ready, but we can do that. We can do that next.
We're doing very well. Oh, and we've got the A3 printouts.
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, if you can hand this up, please. Thank you. These aren't IDs, they're just the same before, it's just A3. I need a moment as well just to get the right document open. Okay, I'm ready when you are, Mr. Atkinson.
Mrs. Coker, you You ready?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Ms. How do you?
Mrs.
Mrs. Cook. By way of introduction, you are Louise Cook, your principal planner, development management at the council. You have qualification, geography, undergraduate degree, and a master's in urban and regional planning. Correct?
Yeah.
You're a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute.
Yeah, that's right.
And you have 17 years experience in total, mostly within local authorities, but 4 years private practice too. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, thank you. Now, could I ask you to turn to your proof and read for me, please, your including remarks under planning balance, so starting at 471 and 471 through to 475, please.
The planning balance. The appeal scheme would be contrary to Greenbelt purposes B and C as per paragraph 138 of the NPPF through encroachment into the countryside and through reducing the existing more localised rural break between Great Bursted and Oak Bridge, leading to the incremental loss of this rural break, slowly eroding the natural break between the two settlements. Whilst the council acknowledge that they do not have a 5-year housing land supply, the established Greenbelt boundaries remain in place and therefore the tilted balance, as per paragraph 11D of the NPPF, and as clarified by Monkhill Limited versus the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government and another 2019, does not apply. Only 32% of the site is PDL. The appeal scheme would cause substantial harm to the openness of the Greenbelt, which is compounded and exasperated by its poor design. The appeal scheme would be a conspicuous urban form eroding the openness of the Greenbelt and would fail to provide a high quality, beautiful place. In respect of the other considerations, substantial weight is afforded to the provision of market and affordable housing, and it is noted that the affordable housing offer is greater than policy requires, which is positive. However, the other claimed very special circumstances, namely PDL and economic benefits, are given limited weight, and all other very special circumstances are afforded no weight. Therefore, it is not considered that the very special circumstances outweigh the substantial harm to the openness of the Greenbelt, whether considered individually or when combined together, other than being very special. The substantial harm to the Greenbelt is given substantial weight, as per paragraph 148 of the NPPF. Overall, in my judgment, the proposals are inappropriate development, which is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt. The proposals are further contrary to purposes B and C of the Greenbelt. Other harm in the shape of substantial harm to the openness of the Greenbelt is caused by the proposals, which is exasperated by their poor design. Substantial weight must be given to this harm. The other considerations identified do not outweigh the harm identified so as to amount to very special circumstances.
Thank you. I think you said exasperated. I think you've written exacerbated.
That's the one.
All right. Thank you. Now let's start with the question of whether the proposal amounts to inappropriate developments in the Greenbelt. And what this turns on in this case is essentially the extent to which the site can be said to be PDL, previously developed land. Yeah. Now, you say that the site is 32% PDL, and Mr. Bell says, well, it's at least 26%. But more importantly, he says that in fact the whole site is previously developed land. And he says that because of the site, you have the paddocks to the west, and then you have the park to the east behind the houses on Southend Road, which have a number of developments on them, some sheds and so on. And units, if you like. And Mr. Bell says that the paddocks to the west form an integral part of the site and are therefore within the curtilage of the buildings to the east. You understand that's his argument, essentially.
Yeah.
Do you accept that analysis?
No, I don't.
And why not?
There are a number of buildings on the site as existing. It's noted that there are stables, but there are also a number of other buildings for different uses, which don't have any relationship to the paddocks at all.
If so, I can just pause you there. I'm picturing a very useful plan, which is prepared by Mr. Crawford. You go to the back of his proof at Appendix 4. He sets out, he identifies all of the other buildings on the land. Do you see that? They're all coloured separately.
Yeah.
So I need a minute to get there.
Sorry, sorry. Mr. Crawford's proof is Appendix 4.
We have a PDF because appendices aren't tabulated.
Appendix 4 starts on PDF page 79.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm there, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, you said a moment ago, Mrs. Cook, that there's a stables, which with reference to Mr. Crawford's plan, is Appendix 4, where there are 13 buildings identified. Which do you understand is the stables?
That'd be building 1.
And that's the biggest one to the north, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you said there are other buildings on the site which are in different use. Which other buildings do you mean, and what use do you understand that they are in?
So just sort of going through the larger of the buildings, building number 4, it's got an indoor swimming pool inside it, and there's like a kitchen area. So I'd say that's sort of a summer house. No doubt used in connection to the dwelling house at Maitland Lodge. And building 6, so further south to that, the larger building, when we went to visit, that was like a car repair, sort of disused workshop. There's quite a lot of rubble inside that building. So yeah, that wasn't a stable use at all. The other buildings, I think 11 had sort of garage doors on the front of it. So I'm assuming it's for garaging or for storage of some sort, storage use. The remainder of the buildings I haven't been inside, so I can't say exactly sure what's
your assessment of the use is from visiting the site.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And Mr. Leach, in his statutory declaration, so I don't know what document number that is.
It's called document 156.
Thank you. What does Mr. Leach tell us? Anything about the use of any of the buildings which Mr. Crawford has identified in his Appendix 4?
So he talks about the stable building. So at paragraph 12 of Mr. Leach's stat deck, he says there are 5 horses in the stables.
Which you understand is building 1?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any other reference to any other buildings, so.
Okay. All right. So the fact that there are other buildings in other uses, does that affect your assessment of what the curtilage is?
Yeah. I mean, the buildings all have different uses, so I would expect a curtilage to be attached to an individual building. It's obviously quite a grey area and it's complicated, and it's a judgment, I guess, that we're making, but I don't believe that the paddocks have any other connection to any of the other buildings, really, other than the stables as such. Yeah, so I don't think you can assume that any of the buildings actually have any relationship to the paddock.
So you're
or
saying
the
that
curtilage of those buildings.
you accept that the paddocks are associated with the use only of
Only
the
building one.
stables?
Yeah, that's right, but not the other buildings.
We don't know. Well, you've made an estimate of what the use of the other buildings is. How, in your judgment, is it possible that the paddocks could form part of the curtilage of any of the other buildings? Do you accept that it's only part of the stables?
No, I think only in the connection to the stables, building one.
So just on that, was the question are the paddocks within the curtilage of the stables open? Is that or is there or what was that your question?
Well, the question was, could the paddocks form the curtilage of the other buildings, or is it the curtilage
That's what I was
of the stables building one?
I have the answer as it's building one, but not the others.
Yeah, that's correct.
Sorry.
Yeah,
just
no.
make sure I've got it right.
All right. Now, if you're right to say that what the curtilage is a matter of fact and degree, it's a judgment for the decision maker here, the inspector. And if he finds that Mr. Bow is correct and that the paddocks do form part of the curtilage of the stables, what do you say about what that means for future development of this site?
Yeah, I think you need to refer to the definition of PDL in the glossary of the MPPF. So it's assuming that the whole of the curtilage shouldn't be developed. So I would be referring to that and suggesting.
Would you like to refer to it?
Yeah,
now,
sure.
just
Yeah,
so
I can
we
read
know?
that out.
Document 3, page 17.
Yeah, so just at the bottom there, previously developed land, the glossary sets out land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure, including the curtilage of the developed land. And then in brackets it says, although it should not be assumed that the whole of the curtilage should be developed, and any associated fixed surface infrastructure.
And in this case, what do you say about development of the whole of the curtilage?
I would say no, it would be inappropriate development. The paddocks are open, they don't have any built form on them, and I think in my proof of evidence there's some aerial imagery, that paragraph 4.9 onwards.
In your proof, yeah?
Yeah, that's right, sorry. And it shows that the paddocks have always been sort of devoid of any built form and have remained open. So any development on that land would be classed as inappropriate in my opinion.
Yeah, just so that we understand what the significance of this is. If we turn back to the framework, it's 149 G, isn't it, which is relevant.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's right.
So that's the reference there to previous land, which may or may not, in this case, include which is the paddocks. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Turn then next to greenbelt purposes, and starting with purpose V, which is to prevent neighbouring towns from merging into one another. And in your proof at 422, yeah, you there.
Yes, I am.
You,
Yes.
you say that the appeal site would lead to incremental loss of the rural break between Great Thurstead and Oak Bridge. And I just wanted to be clear what you meant by that, because Mr. Crawford makes the point that you can't assess the impact on one of the purposes in the context of hypothetical future development, and that there aren't any consented schemes nearby. So what did you mean by incremental loss in that paragraph?
I was trying to say that over time, as planning applications would come in and are received and obviously approved and built out, there would be an incremental loss of the rural break basically between the two settlements.
So you are referring to future applications, or?
Well, I'm referring to this one. So this one would lead to a gradual loss of that break itself.
Yeah. So it's incremental in respect of what, I suppose, is that's my question.
I guess incremental would be if it continued, wouldn't it? If it continued, if there was further applications, which obviously we haven't got or have been approved. So yeah, I take the point there hasn't been any others approved. But this application would lead to the start of that that loss as such. This would be the first one, and any others further south would continue with that if we received them and they were approved.
Okay. In respect of the same purpose, the neighbouring towns merging. Mr. Crawford also makes the point that the appeal site, if developed or at all, doesn't extend any further south than the existing housing, that finger of housing down South End Road. And therefore it can't contribute towards the merging of essentially Billericay and Basildon. How do you respond to that?
I would agree that it obviously doesn't head any further south than existing properties on South End Road, but it would head further south in comparison to properties from Mill Road, which you can see the back of from South End Road. So if you imagine their rear gardens, obviously that's all coming, being built, that would be pulled down south. So I think you've got a row of 9 houses along that southern boundary, which would be coming closer to you and will be visible.
We'll come to visibility, but
Yeah,
in a moment, just keen to keep them separate. I think what you're saying,
there is
whilst there'd be no further extension on Southend Road,
that's right. Yeah,
there would be an extension in the field to the west.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that break there already remains, is obviously would be lost. But I know it doesn't come in, it comes in line with the properties in Southend Road.
And a similar point is made by Mr. Crawford about the commercial development on the eastern side of Southend Road.
Mm.
So if we're approaching north up Southend Road, the point he makes is the first development you see is to your right, it's to the east of the road, the commercial development, which he says signifies the southern edge of the settlement. Do you agree with that?
No, I think that falls outside the settlement in my mind and is read separately from the opposite side of the road where the application site sits and where the residential development on Southend Road starts. So I read that as being a sort of a separate entity, it's a different use as well. I read that quite separately in my mind.
I suppose it's likely to be put to you, well, it's development, it's not, it's really not, well, it's the first thing you see, but you say it's read differently.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah. It doesn't form, it's on its own, isn't it? There is fields surrounding it, as there are fields as you approach Southend Road and the residential development that first hits you as you're heading north.
Sorry, perhaps it'd be useful if we just so that we know what we're talking about. It's in one of the LVIA, I think it's viewpoint 4, if we could.
Do you have a CD or is this a general application?
Well, I'm from financial help.
It's CT 51.
Okay.
Oh, is that the old one? Oh, there's a new one. Oh,
Yeah,
103.
103. Yeah. If we, well, I would just to be clear, if we go to viewpoint 4, which is on page 59 of the LVIA.
I'm using it from Mr. Crawford's proof, the map extract is, that's easy. Just
Okay, well,
Already
that's
got that
an aerial
yeah,
shot.
okay. Bear with
I
me.
think that might be helpful if you could actually find the
Yeah, sure.
page 59.
Could I have the documents reference?
103.
103, thanks. Sorry, I could take the page number as well.
59.
59, cheers. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so just to get our bearings, we have the road Southend Road swooping round to the right in front of us. You can see the sign saying, well, it says welcome to Billericay, and it not really necessarily make that out. It's a prominent white sign.
Yeah.
The appeal site is to the left of the road sign, is that correct?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And the housing which is visible there through the hedges and trees, that's housing on Mill Road, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And the commercial development to the east, which I was talking about, it's that blue circular building plus other buildings behind to the right of that, is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And you say that those are read separately than the start of the, well, read separately.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
All right. So overall then, on this purpose, you conclude that there is a limited impact on reducing this break or preventing the merging of towns amongst others. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Right, and that's in your proof 422. All right. Turning then to purpose C, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. There's a question raised by Mr. Crawford. At his 6.5.7. He says in the second sentence of that paragraph, however, encroachment is not a binary issue, and there are varying degrees of encroachment upon the countryside. So he's saying, well, I'm sure he'll put me right if I've got this wrong, but he's saying it's not just a question of encroachment, yes or no. You can have encroachment to a lesser degree or a greater degree. Do you accept that premise?
I accept part of it, but not the other half. So I think I disagree with, I think you can encroach, you either encroach or you don't encroach. I think it's one or the other. So yes or no for that.
So it is binary.
Yeah, that's right. But in terms of the degrees of encroachment, I agree with what Mr. Crawford said. So yeah, I think there's varying degrees of encroachment, which are obviously subjective, and what we make a judgment on.
So I suppose then he's saying in the same language as Mr. Crawford used, well, he's saying it is a binary issue, but nonetheless there are degrees of encroachment within that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And what Mr. Crawford says about the appeal site is that it's already encroached upon by a number of things which I'd like your views on. And the first one is the urbanizing influence of the existing housing to the north. We've just seen it with viewpoint 4, the housing along Mill Road. Do you agree with that the housing along the north has already urbanized to some extent the appeal site?
I think development at Mill Road is obviously visible, but it's not extremely prominent, and it's some distance away.
The current.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there's openness before you as you're going up Southend Road before the back edge of the properties at Mill Road. So
Yeah, so I'll just pause there because we're
Yeah.
not yet on openness. I'm just
No.
thinking about encroachment at this point.
I don't think it encroaches. I think you can see it, but you have the perception that you've got fields in front of it.
So I take from that you don't accept there is any urbanising influence, or a little, or
I'd say little, but not significant. No.
and a similar point is made in respect of the existing buildings and use, which we've considered already. So we know that there's the main building, which is used as a stables, and then there's the actual horse activity, which Mr. Leach describes. And then there are the 12 other buildings of varying uses. And in respect of encroachment, again, Mr. Crawford says, well, this is clearly a measure of encroachment, quite a significant measure of encroachment. He says just by the nature of those buildings and their use. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I don't think it's significant. The buildings are all single story. They're all very small. Yeah, very low key, really, as well as the uses. This is associated with the five horses. So, they're quite tucked away where they're sited as well, behind the existing residential development. They have very little visibility, really, as you're coming up Southend Road. In comparison to, obviously, as sort of Emily said earlier, 2-story or the 3-story flats is going to be completely different to the situation there at the moment. And also the fact that it will be spread out over into the western parcel or the open paddocks that's there at the moment.
Yeah.
So no, I completely disagree with that point.
And what overall then do you say is the extent of the level of encroachment in your evidence?
That it would be significant.
Right. Moving on then to openness, and I'll deal with both aspects in terms spatial first, then visual. You set out, you both, you and Mr. Crawford, referred to the paragraph in the PPG which talks about that. Mr. Crawford has set out some volumetric figures. What do you make of those figures and the way they're described at Mr. Crawford's 7.2.3? And what I mean is he puts it this way: he says the above figures show that in terms of footprint, the existing buildings within the green belt represent 56% of the amount that is proposed, and in terms of volume, the figure is 45%.
Yeah, I perhaps don't think the figures are expressed particularly clearly, and I think it's quite alarming, really, that there's obviously a significant increase in the volume there. You can see the 6,126 cubic metres that's being added.
That's the final comment. Just to be clear, you don't query the figures themselves. You're not saying
No,
you
I
have your own measurements.
No, I don't have my own measurements. No.
Okay,
So, yeah.
I'm just making it there. Maybe to deal with with your own evidence, but I actually made a similar note when I was going through this about how it's been quoted as 56% of proposed. Normally it'd be the other way round. You'd see a sort of percentage increase on existing. So I think I would like to understand what that is at some point during the inquiry.
No, so I've got, we get your own calculator out. I've asked Mr. Crawford to give all the figures in his examination.
Yeah, I was going to give that heads up to see. I didn't surprise you with that question.
Do that. We'll do that tomorrow after the when Mr. Crawford said.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Do you understand the point the inspector's making and how?
I think you had the same point essentially.
Yeah, that's
which is
right,
why I raised it
I
at
think
that time.
that's a sort of a clearer way and what we'd normally expect to see. An easier way for us to establish the comparison between existing and proposed.
Yeah. All right. Well, and then in the paragraph below, Mr. Crawford talks about the he talks about the proposed buildings, structures and so on. He talks about in addition to the things he has calculated the area and volume of, there'll be other structures such as boundary walls, fences, street furniture and lighting columns, which have a spatial dimension. I mean, I'll ask him, I think they're excluded from the figures. But he goes on to then, in that same paragraph, observe that there are significant amounts of existing fencing and other ancillary items within the site currently. Now, I don't know whether he's seeking to draw a comparison, but what do you say would be the difference between those boundary walls, fences, street furniture, columns, and so on with the proposed development as compared to fences and so on, which currently are on site in spatial terms?
Yeah, I think in spatial terms, it'd be a lot greater impact and there'll be a lot more fencing and ancillary items and everything that's associated with residential dwellings. So I think they'll take up considerably more, they have a considerably greater spatial impact than what's existing. I would disagree with the comment that's saying that it's significant amounts of existing fencing and other ancillary items. From the site visits, it didn't really strike me that that was the case. The paddocks are just surrounded by sort of low level fencing, and I don't think there's any fencing in the outside of the paddocks in the sort of eastern part of the site. Yeah, and obviously with a residential development comes boundary walls, the usual paraphernalia that goes with houses, so outbuildings and children's play equipment and all sorts of really washing lines and things like that. So, and all of that you don't have at the moment because it's it would be a different use. So, yeah, especially it will be, a great deal different and significantly more harmful.
And finally, on the spatial aspect, another thing which is said is that, in fact, the eastern part of the site, i.e. the bit which currently has the stables and the dwellings and stables and the sheds and so on it, will actually have a reduced quantum of development if the scheme is proposed. I think essentially saying the whole site will be built over more or less evenly. So if you look at just that eastern part, there will actually be less quantum, a lower quantum, if the scheme is developed than presently. What's your view about dividing the site up into sectors like that in order to present a judgment about quantum of development?
I'd say it's artificial really, because you haven't really, the whole site, as you say, would be developed as one. So I don't really feel that there's any need to split the site into two or remain as two if it's read like that at the moment. But I think proposed, it's, as you say, it will all be one site. A continuation of use. There won't be that. There's no going to be no divide as such as there perhaps is now, because the whole site will have development spread across it, which is different to the existing situation.
Yeah. All right. We'll deal then with the visual aspect. And I think, yeah, I'll have to ask him about this, but unless I've misunderstood, I think Mr. Crawford is suggesting that the existing development on Mill Road and Southend Road is currently, in the context of a visual assessment of openness, I think he's saying it's more prominent than would be the proposal if developed on the south. What do you say to that?
I would disagree. As I said before, that Mill Road back boundaries, in a sense, really been brought forward towards you heading south. So you have about 9 houses along there. It would be quite visible, 2 stories in height. So yeah, I disagree with that point. And I think it would be quite prominent, really. I think you'll see that quite clearly as you come up the up Southend Road. There will obviously be some boundary screening, but it won't, it's not going to hide the whole development by any means.
And finally, on this, the aspect of the visual aspect of openness, it's said that the level of activity as proposed with 47 houses, that from the wider assessment parcel, there won't be any increase in perception of activity. That's what Mr. Crawford said it is 7.2.7. Bearing in mind we know there will be 47 houses, and currently we know from Mr. Leach we have 5 horses, and I think 5 people who total come to look after them. Do you accept the suggestion that there won't be much difference in perceived activity of the current use against what would be 47 houses and everybody who lives there?
No, I don't agree. I think there'll be significantly greater increase in activity and movements as a result of the proposal, compared to 5 horses, which probably don't really have much sort of an awful lot of coming and going really associated with them. Whereas obviously 47 houses, you can have considerable movements to and from site, or via obviously the same access that there is now.
What about movements within the site? Is there any
within the site
activity?
Yeah, obviously that will spread west where you haven't got movements at the moment. The road is going round and obviously looping into that area. Residential's proposed in that part as well. So there isn't any movements as such now. And we should talk to people riding horses or any, but no, there's no transport or traffic movements associated with that western parcel as existing. So I think there'll be considerably more, and as you say, spread across as well, across the site itself.
Right.
So I think probably the different times of the day that might attract. So at the moment you've got a gate there, and I'd imagine it's, I don't know, you probably don't have people coming and going during the night to attend the horses unless there's perhaps an emergency situation or whatnot, because it is connected to Maitland Lodge, the residential dwelling. Whereas the proposal, it's 47 houses, you could have people coming and going whenever, you know, that's unrestricted as such.
Yes. All right. And then overall, you describe in your evidence the impact on openness as significant. I dare say the evidence, Ms. Bevan, that the impact is limited will be put to you, and you may be asked to agree with that judgment, which we heard a moment ago. Well, is your overall assessment, does it differ from how you wrote it in your proof, having heard the evidence of Ms. Bevan earlier this afternoon?
No, it doesn't vary from my proof. The point made in the proof still stands.
Okay. I'd just like to deal quite quickly and finally in the differences in weight which you give to the various considerations as opposed to Mr. Bell. Now the first one I want to ask you about is economic benefits, which you address at 4.58 with your proof. And you say there, well, economic benefits are a result spin-off of any residential development and don't constitute such as to amount to very special circumstances. And then you refer to what's said in the statement of common ground, where it is accepted, I think it's substantial weight or substantial weight, a significant weight, I think is what's stated in the statement of common ground. Obviously, that was an agreed position. Now you're saying something different in your proof. How do you justify that change?
Yeah, I think probably I'll put my hands up and say that was an error on our part with regards to what was said in the statement of common ground. I still stick with the fact that I think it should be given limited weight. And yeah, the points that within my proof at 4.58 I think still remain. I don't think the economic benefits could constitute a very special circumstance. As you say, they come with any sort of residential development and not necessarily very special as such. Yeah, and I'll stand by that point.
Okay. And then we're some distance away apart on biodiversity net gain. Mr. Bell gives that again substantial weight, and you don't give it any weight at all in your 6.2. I just wondered how you do it. Again, how do you justify that?
Again, I would say it's for obviously a scheme, residential scheme of this size. It would be really a standard requirement of an application process to require the biodiversity improvements there that have been put forward. It's something that we could deal with by condition. And I think if you refer to the NPPF at paragraph 180A, it's saying that.
I'm just give us time to go there. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, I'll just bring that up. Sorry. Yeah, so it says when determining planning applications, local planning authorities should apply the following principles. And then part A says basically is inferring that permission should be refused if any significant harm to biodiversity resulting from a development cannot be avoided. So yeah, by obviously putting any condition on, we would mitigate that harm. So that's why I don't feel that that's a very special circumstance at all. It's, as I say, standard requirements really of the planning application process. And it's just a way of mitigating the impacts rather than constituting anything very special.
Okay, and then finally, affordable housing. You give it substantial weight, and the appellants very substantial weight. Why do you not accept that very substantial weight ought not to be given to the affordable housing provided here? And there are a number of inspector's decisions which you don't rely on where the inspector has given that much weight to the affordable housing.
I think come to the view that substantial weight should be given because obviously, 45% is significantly over what we would normally require, but actually this is only a 47 unit scheme. So in the midst of things, it's not, as we said, we were saying earlier, it's actually quite a small scheme. So in terms of the actual numbers of dwellings, so in this case, it'd be provided 21 affordable dwellings. It's actually not really a huge amount in the scheme of things. And I think that's why I probably wouldn't be saying giving it very substantial weight in that case, because the actual numbers themselves are quite low.
And the usual policy requirement, remind me.
A maximum of 30%. So that would take you to about 14. So really the difference between 14 and 21 isn't really a huge deal. Obviously it does help us a lot, but yeah, I still wouldn't give it very substantial weight, and then just suggesting such substantial weight would be my assessment of that and would remain.
Very well. Okay, is there anything else you would like to say at this stage? Again, don't feel you have to just because I'm giving you the opportunity, but if there's anything you're burning to tell the inspector whilst you've got the opportunity.
No, I think that's fine. No. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure how to phrase this. It might come up in cross-examination anyway. I'm just trying to think about the overlaps between previously developed land, which buildings are question use and which are other uses, and how that links to the council's position on what percentage is PDL and what isn't. If you're coming back to this anyway in cross-examination, maybe I'll just leave that till then.
I've got a question about what was just said, but
okay.
Obviously it would be questionable for cross-examination just to make sure I absolutely understand where the council's at. But so obviously, so if there's something that's burning in your mind, if you start asking about it, then the witness isn't inferred overnight. So you do feel free, because then obviously I can tailor my questions tomorrow to try and build on whatever answers you get.
Yes, I suppose the question is, do you think any of the uses are in agricultural use as opposed to equestrian in those buildings which aren't the lodge or building one?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you. Helpful.
Yeah, no, that was my only question. Okay.
I am happy to start now, but
No.
To draw stumps.
I prefer to draw something and start again in the morning.
That's what I'm saying.
Anything else anyone wants to raise?
So we owe you commissions 106.
Yes.
Take stock of in the morning.
Okay. Thank you. We'll be starting at 9:30 in the morning. Okay. In that case, thank you very much. The inquiry is adjourned.